Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at data access. We'll be discussing addresses, layer 3, logical addresses, devices on the same network, roles of the data link layer addresses, devices on remote networks, role of the network layer addresses, roles of the data link layer addresses, and then finally we'll examine those data link addresses. This is part of my series on Introduction to Networks. I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. As we talk about data access, we need to talk about addresses. And there's two addresses here that happen in our OSI model. This here is a representation of our OSI model. Physical layer is layer 1, data link is 2, 3, 4, and then our upper layers are 5 through 7. We have those there. And as we can see at layer 2, our data link layer, and layer 3, our network layer, we have two different addresses. One is the physical address, one is the logical address. Layer 2 data link address, that's responsible for delivering the data from one network interface to another network interface. That's responsible from delivering it from your PC to your router. Then from that router to your ISP, through their cloud, to your recipient's router, to its final destination. That's what the data link is responsible for. Network interface card to network interface card. Layer 3 is logical addresses. That's responsible for delivering the IP packet from the original source, so the client, to the final destination, the server. When I make a request, it starts with my IP address, and then the destination is where I want it to go to. That web server, that email server, is where we're sending it to. Those are the two addresses we're going to talk about. For our network layer 3 addresses, there's also two portions to each address, whether you're dealing with IP version 4 or IP version 6. There's the network portion, identifying the computers that are on the same local area network. Typically, they're in the same area. The second part is the host portion. That identifies the unique device inside of that area, inside of that network address. So we have a network portion and a host portion. Network portion, you can logically group computers together. Host portion identifies that unique device inside of that network. Devices on the same network. We can identify devices on the same network by using that network portion. If we look at these IP addresses here, if we look here, the IP addresses, they begin with the same portion. They begin with 192.168.1. That signifies that those two devices are on the same network. Now, there's some rules that we have to get into. We're going to talk about that in an episode coming up here. But the idea is that if the beginning part matches, they're probably on the same network. The data link address is that address that's physically burnt into your network interface card. It's burnt into an EEPROM chip or one of the little chips on that network card there, and you can't change it. Well, you're not supposed to. You can sometimes using software, but you're not supposed to be able to change it. And for this series, we're going to assume you can't change it. It's burnt on there. Now, if it's on the same network, it has the same beginning. Once again, notice our PC and FTP server begin with 192.168.1 because they have the same network portion. They're on the same network. We just use the data link, that Ethernet frame header MAC address, to deliver our data. We don't have to travel outside of our network. If we have to travel outside of our network, that's where we use the IP address. But if it's on the same network, we can match that same beginning, that network portion on the IP address. We can just use that data link we can just use the data link address, that MAC address, to send data from PC1 to the FTP server. And that's where the data link address gets used. Okay, devices on a remote network. what happens when PC1 wants to reach its final destination, but it's not on my local area network? What happens when PC1 wants to reach the web server? It has to go through all these other different networks. It has to go through all these other devices. Now, how does that change in the layers? Well, if we look here, yes, they all have different MAC addresses. Those are the addresses that are burnt into the card. They all have different IP addresses. Their systems administrator assigned those IP addresses. But how does that change? Now, let's remember the network layer, the IP packet header, that ensures delivery from the beginning to the end. So those addresses never change, but that data link layer, that MAC address, what's burnt into these devices, that changes. That data link layer sends data from PC1. We send it so it gets closer to the web server, which in our path is R1. So we send it from PC1 to R1. Then we receive it in there. Do we change the network IP address? No, we change the data link layer because it goes on to the next one. And that's what we're looking at here. So the role of these network addresses is to facilitate here the role of the network address is to ensure delivery from the beginning to the end. That's what we're looking at here. The role of the data link layer when we're on different networks is to move it from device to device, from network card to network card. So moving it from PC1 to R1. Then we move it from, then we use the data link layer MAC address to go from one router to the next router to the next router, and then finally we reach the last router, and then that's responsible to use MAC addresses to move there. Okay, so we're going to explain this through an example here. This example, we build our PDU. We have our header information down there. Our layer 3 IP packet here, we have the source IP address. That's our PC1, 192.168.1.10. We have our destination IP address, 172.16.1.99. That's where we're going. Those will never change in the process, but when I go from network card to network card, that changes. And so looking here, for our first step here, when it leaves the PC, our destination NIC, our destination MAC address is the MAC address that is right there. Our source, where it came from, is PC1. So that goes into there. Then that packet travels across the media, comes into the router. Once we're in the router here, what's going to happen is we're going to go and redo this. So we're going to erase this and look at it. Once again, right now we are at this router. And so to get information from this router to this router, our source IP, our destination IP, our layer 3 IP addresses, that hasn't changed, but now we need to move it from this network interface card on this router to the next network interface card on this router. We now have to change our source and destination. We have to go and rewrite that. So we de-encapsulate it, we take that layer 2 header off, and now we put a new one on at that point in time. We don't change layer 3 at all. And so our destination NIC MAC address is where are we sending it? That's our next device. That goes there. Our source, where is it coming from, is right there. And so we rebuild our frame at that point in time, and we send it on to the next device. When it gets to the next device, we're going to take off that header information. We take off that header information, we rebuild our frame again. Once again, we don't change that layer 3 IP addresses because we're still trying to get to the destination. Layer 3 is concerned that we make it to its final destination, but now we need to get it from that last router into the web server. And so what we do from here is we rebuild the layer 2 header. This is our source network interface card MAC address. So that goes into this field. Here is where we're sending it to. Our destination MAC address. That goes here, and now we can send that from the router to the web server. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on data access. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and depending upon the platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on Introduction to Network. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode on my series on Introduction to Networks. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.